Hello, this is Tim Lang. I'm chairing this next session. In this session, we decided that we're not going to have any speeches or even mini talks. We thought, given what's happened earlier, particularly the excellent session we've just had, that we would dive straight in. Adam Alexander, who's not on the panel, but who's the Eminence Grise who pulled this session together, from Monmouthshire, has called it provocatively taking back control. And given the previous sessions, that's entirely appropriate. What would a localized food system look like? What can it do? What ideas are there? Is the kind of theme that we've been asked to raise. And we've decided that the panel will address that. I will just pose 4 questions to the panel. What's the problem to which this is the conclusion? What are the goals? What structures are needed and how can it grow? And what support is there and can it be put onto long-term footing? And it primarily was this interesting project, the 1,200 acres project that's emerged from Monmouth and Brecon. The calculation that the people of Monmouth and Brecon could be fed from 1,200 acres horticulture. It's kind of diving into one of the themes of previous sessions of how can Wales rebuild its horticulture? What would it look like? Not the scraps and the crumbs from the hypermarket economy's table, but what would it look like if land was repurposed and how can that be done? And the panel we've got is suitably got someone, not just myself from outside Monmouth and Brecon, but Peter Gregg of Piper's Farm, a very well-established business based from the land to products for consumers, who's going to provide that sort of external experience. Michael Powell, Rural Programs Manager at Monmouth County Council, a hugely supportive person from inside the regional government for this 1,200, and Duncan Fisher from Our Food 1,200, which is what the Monmouth project is going to be called, who will talk much more from the inside of this particular project. But we're doing this, hosting this project, focusing on the 1,200 Our Food, Monmouth and Brecon, but thinking about it more generally as well. So I'm going to dive in, not going to say any more. We the panel agreed they were happy with just this short introduction from me, and we'll go into these 4 questions and begin with the first. What is the problem to which this is the solution or this is the conclusion? And why is this a problem? Why is the need for a more local supply system, why is it needed? Duncan, would you like to start this? Give your thoughts, and then we'll go to Mike from the County Council, and then go to Peter. You know, why is this a solution to what problem? Duncan.
Thanks, Tim. I will answer that question very briefly. We basically identified 7 key problems. The first is that farms are getting the prices that farms are getting for their food is too low. And that's because they don't own the supply chain and powerful intermediaries are extracting the profit. So that's the first. The second is the infrastructure of our local food economy has been stripped out in the last decades. So almost everything grown here is exported and almost everything consumed here is imported. And supermarkets are sort of hoovering up the money out of the local economy. Young people are leaving. There are no jobs. There's nowhere to live. We live in a national park, and in Wales, wealthy people from outside are buying houses and land and forcing prices up way beyond the capacity of those who live here to stay here. Climate change is already here. You all saw the pictures of the floods last year. And next we expect fires that will burn our trees. And when a flood on the Usk River hits Newport, when the tide is coming in, we will see a disaster beyond anything we've seen so far. Soil quality is a big problem around here. We know that rainfall is increasing, but the amount of rain it takes to create a flood has nearly dropped by half since the Second World War. And soil is by far the biggest reservoir for holding back water during heavy rain. The sixth one is phosphate pollution. The Usk, our river, is the worst affected river in Wales, and all new building in the national park has been suspended and halted until that problem is understood and fixed. And ironically, that includes housing for young people. And finally, there is a lack of knowledge around healthy food. So most people will judge food on price and on what it looks like and not what's in it.
That's a very good opening, sort of not apocalyptic, but very sober.
It's like your book, Tim.
Yeah, that's right. It's nice to listen to you, because people always have the reaction of thinking they want to go and jump off the nearest cliff when they hear me talk. But you're right, those are the evidence-based problems. So Mike Powell from the council, the county council, I mean, without putting you on the spot, why are you backing this?
Well, you know, it may be, Tim, that I'm old enough and ugly enough, so I'm told to go back quite a few years. I almost go back in time as far as you, Tim, but not quite as far. Anyway, putting some things into context, let's rewind our clock slightly. You know, fresh food, preferably local source, is proved to be healthier. Look at the recent Welsh Government studies on supermarket fresh produce. You know, farm gate, far better produce, you know, than, you know, stored produce that's gone through the food chain. You know, there should be no need to have these long supply chains. You know, and that's, as Duncan alluded to, is fostered in particular by the successes of supermarkets. Years ago, every new home built after World War I, as we know, they had homes which were called fit for heroes, and a garden large enough to feed your family. You know, that was great. That's how things were. Even my dad's garden always seemed to be growing something fresh. My mum had learned the techniques of food preservation, you know, pickling, root veg storage, jams, relishes, and full use of the cold stone in the pantry to keep dairy and meats as fresh as possible. As we couldn't get access to freezers that were just about coming around. The only supermarkets, not as we know them now, was the Co-op, with all fresh produce locally sourced, packed and wrapped in front of you. We didn't have the pleasure of self-service supermarkets for years after. I think, if I'm right, the first supermarket in was the Co-op in 1948 in Manor Park in London. And of course, that didn't come to, those concepts didn't come to the backwaters of Wales, you know, being backward people as we are, in commas. The same was with the local butcher. Fantastic, local fresh meat, sawdust on the floor, carcasses hanging anywhere, much to the scariness of youngsters. We had the daily deliveries of our pint milk, or with my family, it was 5 pints a day because we had a big family, part of the big baby boomers. And with the bottled milk, the milkman would bring a daily newspaper, and of course, delivered in an electric milk float. Regular deliveries by the baker and the pop man, he returned up. If you didn't have a garden or couldn't manage one yourself, you called on neighbours who would prepare, sow, tend, harvest. Then you share the spoils. And some of the garden surplus was bought off you by the local mobile greengrocer with his fantastic van full of all sorts of fantastic goodies, you know, where you had even bananas and fancy cheeses packed up in little bits of paper, all stuff like that.
So
I think,
Mike, do you see this? Sorry to kick in. You're giving.
Yeah, go on.
No. You're giving a lovely. Let me be self-critical. So a romantic view forward to the past.
Yeah.
What Duncan was saying was, the future is going to be these terrible things, floods, the phosphates, the health problems, etc. Are you saying the county council is supporting and interested in the 1200 Our Food project because it's going to try and turn the clock back? Or is this a mixture of modernity and turning the clock back?
Well, yeah, I'll agree, Tim. I do tend to be a bit of a romantic.
No, I'm not being critical.
However, I think my message would be that what happened in the past is not always wrong, as my grandchildren and others will believe. We got so much to learn from the past 100 years or more, and using those principles coupled with today's technologies must be a positive way forward. Keep it local, keep the economy local, retain and encourage more land-based career opportunities, and we'll all enjoy healthier lives.
Right. And I don't know if you can see in the chat, Patrick Hannay is saying, surely Duncan needs to add the issue of horticulture. There's a sense in which the council backing 1200 is really important because it's picking up the points that Jenny Rathbone and others made in the previous session of how the politicians and the political structures, the institutional structures I was talking about in my opening talk, can begin to support transition. And presumably the council is supporting this, and that's important. It's not just a group of individuals saying, let's rebuild horticulture in Monmouth. It's got support of the political structures. And that, Peter, to turn to you, presumably that's what you didn't have when you started Piper's Farm in Devon, not dissimilar area in some respects. So what's your thinking about this? What's the problem to which you see as an outsider that this can be a solution?
Thank you, Tim. I think it might be helpful just to paint the background to the moment at which Piper's Farm was conceived. Henry and I, when we were first married, we farmed a high hill farm in Wensleydale, where the political structures you've just alluded to was paying us to double the output of the farm. So it was a high hill farm, and we were being paid £80,000 in government grants to go from 600 sheep to 1,200 sheep, 40 cows, 80 cows. We were being paid to drain the hillsides. We were being paid to grip the peat moorland. All of the things which now have been seen to be absolutely the reverse of actually how the landscape should be managed. But as farmers, we were being actively paid to pursue this post-war agenda, food from our own resources, increase commodity quantity above all else. We then went, and I worked with my father on an industrial chicken system where, and the thing about the Dales was nature was king. We learned to respect the power of nature. I worked with my father on industrial chickens where nature is excluded. But very quickly, we realized it wasn't the political influences which were the problem. Here was a globalized, industrialized food system, which was being driven like a juggernaut by big corporate power. And 30 years ago, to us, we were young farmers, we had young children, we realized we were in an industry producing food we were not prepared to feed to our children, and we were doing it in a way which we felt any customers who saw it would be so shocked they wouldn't want to buy it. So antibiotics sustaining a totally unsustainable system of food production. So for us, it was very clear. We needed, as farmers, to go back to producing food we were happy to feed to our children. And we needed to do it in a way which meant it was of real value to our customers. And I think what 1200 does brilliantly is simply put a ring fence around that concept and say, first and foremost, food production should be for nutritional benefit of customers. And the system of supply should not be dictated by global corporates. It should be dictated by a functional system of supply and real market demand within the region of production.
That's okay. That's really good. You sort of up the stakes politically, which I think is good. There's got to be some clarity about the relocalization agenda, but it's tricky, you know. And certainly in my talk at the beginning of this conference, I was trying to say I thought there was a really exciting opportunity in Wales with the beginnings, if not consensus, but a coherence which is emerging, around which the political arguments can occur at different levels. And I personally share your view. But to kind of wrap up this first question, what's the problem to which local or bioregional thinking is the solution? To paraphrase Duncan and all of you, it's everything. It's everything. You three are nodding. Okay, well, that's complex world. You know, I'm a policy man, as you know, and that's why politicians run away from this, because they say, I can't deal with it in the short term. So it's interesting. Again, I'm coming back to Mike Powell. In a sense, you're very interesting, Mike. This is the council supporting this. That's kind of 1880s thinking, actually, if you want to be romantic and go back, Mike. The last time the British state really started trying to get the local was when farming was collapsed, actually. The repeal of the Corn Laws, 1846. By the 1880s, 1890s, farming was in real disarray. And by 1910s, it was on the back foot. It was only producing about a third of food. Well, British farming is producing about 50% if you take some government calculations, a bit more if you take other calculations. But what 1200, this project does, is say the land must be used for health. And it's where Peter ended up. It's where Duncan started and Peter ended up. So if health is the connection, health and environment are the connection for the land, let's move to question 2. What actually can this do? Is it to rebuild a vibrant local economy, to take Peter's point, get in opposition to supermarkets? Is that what you're wanting? Duncan and Mike, are you gently, Mike probably can't say it, but Duncan, you're waving your heads now. This is to get you going. What is it for and what's it against? Duncan.
Well, we've set out some goals. As you say, we have to fix everything because if you don't fix it all, you'd fix nothing. We've set out to secure 1,200 acres for small farm enterprises, implementing regenerative horticulture and using high productivity techniques that have been developed internationally. And
so the focus is on, well, let's get this clear. Sorry to interrupt you, but this is horticulture.
It's horticulture, yeah, but...
Is it the horticulture of mixed farming?
It's horticulture as a foundation, right? So the point is we have to build a big enough local supply chain system that offers a viable alternative to all the farms in the region, to the supermarket system. So, and horticulture is a mechanism of doing that. We don't just want to sell vegetables and things, and a lot of horticulture farms are mixed as well, but there are a lot of other farms in our region. And so the aim is to create, I mean, we chose 1,200 because that would, using rather modest productivity rates by international standards, that could feed all 56,000 households in our region. Okay, but more importantly than that, it is about building that a foundation. But that's a very complicated thing to do because there are lots of other things missing. Like that means creating 1,200 jobs. It requires housing 1,200 people, and there is nowhere for them to live at the moment. It all depends on the local farmers owning the supply chain. They must own it. The profit must go to the roots, must go back to the roots. It cannot go anywhere else, otherwise it isn't viable. So that's kind of, and then of course there's the climate thing, fixing carbon in the soil and increasing absorbency, increasing carbon fixation. And then there's the phosphate problem too. But that's the meaning of 1,200. It is big enough to create a viable mainstream alternative for all farmers in our region. And that's going to take, we're not going to do this overnight, by the way. We think this is going to take us at least 10 years. We're here for the long term.
Yeah, good. We've had a question or a point made from Vicky. Kind of, I'll paraphrase it. What about the cities? I mean, this is lovely for Monmouth and Brecon, and is this turning your backs upon South Wales conurbation, or if this was, I don't know, up on Anglesey, thinking of that interesting project we were hearing about in the previous section. Anglesey used to be the breadbasket of North Wales. If there was a 1,200 for Anglesey or for the Clwyd, what would it be? What's the connection to the town? Mike, has that featured at all with you? The county council doesn't need to be bothered about Cardiff.
No. I mean, to a great extent, we invented the borders, we invented the local authorities, we invented the roads, the towns, the names, but as far as the council's concerned, this is a theoretical exercise as far as what will 1,200 acres do. And as far as we're concerned, if that 1,200 acres sits across various areas of Wales or the UK, it doesn't make any difference. In Monmouthshire, we're right next to Hereford, soft fruits galore. And so we have Pembroke potatoes. Why do we need to replicate what people are doing there? Because local, if you take local, it'd be 30 miles roughly, At the same time, we are working with the Cardiff Capital Region and trying to look at the South East Wales piece of work. How can we replicate the 1,200 concept, and how do we free up land that's available both in public ownership, county farms, the Welsh Government own a lot of land, NRW, as far as the forestries. There's a huge amount of public land available that we can't just look at Monmouthshire. We do, I'm a parochial guy myself. I live in the middle of Monmouthshire, but realize that you can't live in an island. Tim, it's got to be much wider. This is not a Monmouthshire climate issue. This is a worldwide global issue, and we have to address that from a totally open point of view. I
think I'll wait to see what Vicky thinks about that answer, but it's a very positive answer. It's not sort of Little Monmouthshire, that's parody the Little England thinking. It is socially just in its vision, and I think the looseness that you've just described, Mike, is actually a strength. But it's a good question from Vicky. Peter, what's your thinking? I mean, you were in your own experience much more having to think on the farm scale and a farm business, and the sheer economic viability. Let me not put words into your mouth. I've had this sort of thing thrown at me when I was a farmer. This is all pie in the sky, fantasy, lovely utopian stuff, great echoes of radical Wales thinking from the past. But is this really going to deliver anything? Does this have, will it work?
Yeah, I think the point about the origins of Piper's Farm is when I was a kid in West Kent, all the neighbours were small family farms, and they had all gone by the mid-80s. Yeah. And so we started the business with a very clear vision of building a jigsaw of multiple smaller scale farming businesses that went through a digital platform. But the critical point here is the point Duncan made. I don't think farmers need to own the supply chain, but farmers must get a realistic proportion of the retail value to sustain them. And this is the problem in conjunction with the government policy for quantity of food post-war. They've had a fixation with cheap food. which is cheap at the point of sale. The price on the shelf appears to be cheap. But this is, obviously it's a myth, because value in food comes in many different forms, not least the actual external costs that are the result of industrializing the food system. So we would say the smaller scale family farming model is the most resilient form of production because it's flexible, it's adapted to regional resources. And this is why the 1200 model is such an important concept. It is encouraging a region to focus on the best use of its resources. I don't believe the products necessarily have to be sold within that geographical area, which answers the point raised about what happens within cities. It is simply that the regional systems of food production must be based around their resource mix, the best use of their resources to deliver food which is truly nutrient dense, and the right proportion of its retail value must be returned to the point of production.
I think that's it's very well put, but it's also an enormous challenge. I mean, like us all, I think probably on this conference, we all just think the financial incentives strip farming. There is minimal value added to farming compared to, a sector that's emerged in 15 years to deliver food in towns. There's more money being made there than the whole of farming, according to some calculations. I mean, companies like Getty and the new Russian ones, they're sprouting in every city in Britain, indeed across Northern Europe. So you can employ cheap labor to deliver something on a bicycle at 15 minutes for someone who's got a lot of money and hasn't managed to go out and shop. And they're going to make more money than a primary grower who's spent a year or 3 years. Now that's the hard reality, Mike, that the county council has got to see itself as supporting. If we take Duncan, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, this isn't going to be done in a day. You can't alter the hard economics, which means it's very hard for a horticulturalist to make money. And I do want to come across in the next section to talk about labor, because who's going to be doing this? British horticulture is on its knees at the moment. The soft fruit industry, the only sector of horticulture in the UK that's grown, is now reduced this year by 20% and is planning to reduce next year by 20%. I speak as someone who's just in the last month had meetings with the soft fruit industry. It's been the only success story of British horticulture. So this is very ambitious, this 1200, and I think, and wonderful. I think it's wonderful, but the ambition has got to address this issue about money returning to the primary producer, unless it's going to be voluntary, unless there's going to be a large element of gardeners producing more, not necessarily being on a commercial basis. I mean, I don't know if that's what you're thinking about, Duncan. No, you're not. Okay. No,
I mean, I think there is a myth. There is a myth about the unprofitability of horticulture. There's been a lot of international experimentation with technique, and that the way to make it profitable, and I mean profitable, right, that you can live on it, is first of all extreme focus on efficiency in every minute area of the business, right? It's an obsessional thing that you have to develop. It's the marginal gains of efficiencies. And there is so much you can do, right down to the size of the tools and specially built everything, right? And the ergonomics and the layout, everything. And the second thing is owning the supply chain. The farmers have to they have to own it, because if they don't own it, they're giving the profit. I mean, it could be another farm that owns it on behalf of them, but the point is they have to collaborate. Can I just reply to Vicky? about the cities. We need to. It comes in phases. At the moment, we get requests from Cardiff, can you supply, right? And we say no, because there just isn't enough. That everything that is grown at the moment amongst the small number of farms that are doing this is sold immediately without hardly any marketing, which is a great place to be. Demand is far ahead of supply. But as we get more farmers, especially as we get towards 1,200, we will be able to create shops and markets in Cardiff, in Bristol, in Hereford, and sell our stuff directly there. And that's where the collaboration amongst the farms comes in. So that will come, but we have to grow slowly. We are so far behind in this area that, you know, we have to start where we are, which is small, and build up.
Okay, this is good. I'm glad we're getting into the nitty-gritty stuff, because at one level, going back to Mike's very eloquent sort of echoes from the past sort of position that he was sketching out, the elephant in the room is that British farming, and I will lump everyone together, has been really bad at cooperating. 50 years ago, when I started getting interested in all of this, the comparison between French farmer cooperatives and small farming supporting itself and having the infrastructure provided there, no wonder they've survived politically much better, but not totally, actually. One shouldn't get romantic about French farmer cooperation. But it seems to me, Mike, what you're hooking Monmouth County Council to is a pretty medium-term, if not long-term, support for rethinking the infrastructure that can allow small farming to extract more value. And that is recreating the co-op movement at one level, which started in the 1840s and sold off farms.
It is, Tim, but going back to what Duncan has just alluded to correctly, all of the small producers currently using permaculture, different growing techniques, no dig and the rest of it, they sell everything now that they're producing. Now, I'm approached regularly by other public body organizations, such as the NHS in Wales, where they buy the chickens. A lot of it comes from Poland. And then that is exacerbated by our pollution of the Wye from chicken farms. And you know this better than I. However, what Monmouthshire is there to do, and public bodies, and we can't do these things ourselves, we can only put things in place to allow farmers to maximize the profits, because our interests are to grow the economy, to grow the health of the citizens in the county. So we must be instrumental in supporting any intervention that benefits the economy. It keeps the youngsters in the county. We've got the most aging population in Wales, in the county. And all of these things have to be addressed. Otherwise, in 50 years' time, we will have an ancient, creaky, non-productive, non-land-based, full of equine, hungry citizens who come to a beautiful county for horses and not using the land for growing. Sorry, I'm not trying to be all-encompassing, because I love horses myself, but you get my message.
Yeah, I think there are lots of nods going on. I mean, we've had some comments in the chat. I mean, one person said, look, what this is about is a new impetus for sort of rural / social entrepreneurship. Another person said privately to me, isn't this about injecting social vision into business? What's your view about that? Duncan just nodded, but Peter, what do you think about that? A social vision into horticulture?
I think absolutely spot on. But I was just thinking, as Mike was talking, the average age of the farming community is nudging 60. So.
But it always is. Peter, sorry to interrupt. When I started academic work, when I stopped farming 35 years ago, it was 56. It's always old gits, basically.
Yeah.
And, I just talked with a farmer, a young farmer, I won't say who it was, but in England, whose mid 70-year-old parents had refused to hand over to a 40-year-old the farm. And rightly, this person had gone. So, you know, there are really tricky emotional and familial relations at stake. Come on, you come in.
Yeah, absolutely. And you make a very good point there. And the point is, if it's a 70-year-old hanging onto the checkbook, that's a fundamentally bad indicator of a sustainable industry. But if there are tax breaks for people to say, whatever you do, hang on to the farm when you die, that's a part of the system which needs to be addressed. But why, I would say, has our industry lacked that social element that you've just referred to? And it's because we have not been attracting young blood who have this enthusiasm, this energy to be part of a really healthy, functional local society. And that's what farming should be. Farming and food production should be at the heart of a functional local culture. And this is where I pick up on one of the points that Duncan made. It's about doing it efficiently. I am definitely not suggesting that farmers should be operating without the benefits of new technologies. We should be running really tight, well-run businesses and business models. But a massively important tool we have to do that is a digital world. So when my great-grandfather started his chain of food shops in the 1880s, it was in response to the Industrial Revolution. And he thought all these people living in cities will need to be supplied because they have no connection with the land. Our vision would say a digital world offers the opportunity for a rural revolution. And I take the point about housing, obviously. There needs to be a totally holistic view of making this vision a reality. But I would say social conscience, social at the heart of everything we do as a food and farming industry should be fundamental, should be part of the thinking. But it's about hard-nosed economics, and the digital component, the digital tech gives us huge opportunity to do that.
Peter, if I could jump in very quickly, Tim, the technical concepts, you know, we've been fortunate in Monmouthshire that we have a 5G test bed going on, and I hear the groans around the room. We haven't got 1.5G, 2G, but it's a 5G pilot looking at techniques that will help farmers with advanced tools. And we know all the agri-tech stuff and all the potential, which is not appropriate to small-scale farming in particular. However, being able to know where you put your fertilizers, you know, to be able to have your stock remotely managed, that you can identify when your stock is out in the lanes. And all of this stuff we're testing on 2 farms, quite local to me now, as part of a £5 million 5G pilot. So it's once again that the local authorities getting involved in looking at particular interventions that help the whole well-being of farmers, because part of the project is around the health and well-being of, you know, as you know, Peter and Tim, one of the highest suicide rates, you know, in any industry. So we're trying to work with farmers to join up, to be again socially active with each other and not isolated, because there's now no farm workers. If you get my message.
Yes, I do. There are 2 comments on the chat. Firstly, there's a session on chickens after lunch today, and also a session tomorrow on digital platforms in the mid-afternoon. Peter, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I just want to add in, I think, Mike, in your 5G experiment, you're talking about farmers being able to use tech, for example, in stock control. Yes, there's a danger that tech only exacerbates the problem of isolation of farmers. I'd toss in another use of tech, is that those members of farming families who might have an instinct to be part of the local health community would say, because I can manage my business with my phone, There was a suggestion in the news yesterday, depression could be cured, not necessarily with drugs, but give people access to fresh air and nature. So somebody with that sort of instinct would say, I'm going to engage with the local surgery. I'm going to encourage people who might be referred for depression to come to our farm where we've got food production in harmony with nature, and within that environment, I can actually generate another revenue stream that is of real social and cultural value to the community. It's real market need that is a very good use of this new digital world.
Tim, can I come in on the
issue of labour? The labour and skills issue, it is important. Okay, there are skills. For me, Duncan, I don't know whether you've thought about this.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, we like a gift from heaven, the Black Mountains College was set up just down the road by other entrepreneurs, which is providing training people in exactly the kind of skills that we're going to need. So it's fantastic to have it just up the road. But I think the way that we are dealing with this issue of aging landowners and farmers is the idea of leasing land for farming enterprises. This is not an established practice. We've piloted it very successfully with one farm which started last year, and so we know it can work. And that's one of the things we're going to do. We're setting up a new institution which can build trust with local landowners. That's fundamental. They have to trust you, and we are going to them saying, "Will you lease 5 acres for a small farm enterprise?" Now, when you do that, you immediately start making the sector accessible to younger people who cannot ever buy a 100-acre farm, right? It's not going to happen. So it's like landowners, we liken it to, if you had an office block in the city, you would rent out the offices, right? And make money off them. Well, landowners can do the same. They can make more money this way from 5 acres than they can in any other way on that land. So that's what we're going to try and build as a practice, and create an institution that has the skills and competence in land management, in leasing land and subleasing land to entrepreneurs and so on. So I think there are lots of young people who want to farm. Yeah. There are lots of young people who want to farm, and we want to get them here.
I mean, that's well said. Here's the advantage that small countries have, and indeed highly urbanized countries like the UK generally, although it's patchy by region, obviously, is that there's a mismatch between rural jobs and urban interest in rural jobs. And that's something that, it's why this 1200 project and others like it are so important, because there's a lasting recognition of that, or for the first time for 50 years, really. And Jane Powell reminds us that there's a session on the Black Mountains College tomorrow lunchtime, apparently, as well. Let's move on to our 4th question before we throw it open. What support is needed? It comes back almost to Mike, my friendly question to you. Why is the county council involved? Why are you here? In the nicest of senses. What support, Duncan, is needed to grow this? Okay, you've got this ambition, you've got goodwill, you're beginning to get some funding, you've got a new infrastructure beginning to emerge, but you'll have to grow that very fast. If you're talking about shops, you're taking leases, you've got to have hubs. All the experience of that is very big stuff. It doesn't just get done by one person and a sheepdog, or just buying a few secondhand hoes, HOES. What support is needed? You must have been thinking this through. Mike, you must have been thinking. Let's start.
I'm happy to come in there, Tim.
Yeah, okay, you start.
As you might know, Monmouthshire County Council, the same as other county councils, still own county-owned farms. And we are the landlords, and we hold these assets on behalf of the citizens of the county. Yeah. And a lot of other farms in Wales have been sold off as going concerns. So the councils have reaped the short-term benefits of the capital, from the sales. Now, a lot of the tenanted farms, we got 16 in the county, so about 2,500 acres. And immediately Duncan says, wow, that's twice my problem solved. However, they tend to be long-term leased farms, on the generational farms. But we have one particular farm in the south of the county that the farmer is surrendering his tenancy in February next year. So we've commissioned via the Rural Development Programme a study which has been completed about looking at this 150-acre farm. What can it be repurposed for? So this is, we could say we'll sell it and get capital returns. We'll re-let it in exactly the same way we've always done. We'll re-let it with caveats around green infrastructure, carbon sequestration, and all the other things that we need to do. Or we tenant it to a body that can sub-tenant to 5-acre plot holders, as an example. And then it brings all the questions about housing. Where do you house the people? Don't you increase carbon, reduce it? Where are your local supply chains? How that works? But the whole study has come, which is, it is in the public domain now, so I can share the link at some point. That study is it really helps Duncan with the 1200 group. Where are you going to go? Because if this land can be freed up, and we want to use it as examples of, there's viticulture opportunities on south-facing, okay, that doesn't feed the nation, but it certainly gives us a bit of enjoyment. We got the opportunities for small-scale polytunnel within some of the now semi-derelict farm buildings, the opportunity for controlled environment agriculture, vertical growing, aquaponics. So you can have complementary high-profit industries within a farm. So we're considering how we can reshape the future of our county farms. So it's again, very positive outlook.
Very good. Duncan, say more.
Yeah, so our approach, as someone has mentioned already, is a social entrepreneurial approach. So we're taking the lead of the Coalition of the Willing, creating our Food 1200 as a community benefit society, bringing together all the movers and shakers in the region and forging ahead with all the issues like finding farmers, finding land, finding housing, getting finance, supply chains, the whole thing. We've got to fix them all. But the support we need, first of all, we need rock solid support, and we've got it, by the way, from the Monmouthshire County Council. Incredible support. Thank you, Mike. Public acknowledgement of the amazing support you're giving us, and the National Park Authority, which is being fantastic as well. And we know that not all the regions in Wales have that benefit. Secondly, we need to have, as a local region, we need to have a strong voice nationally, but that's very difficult to do when you're working at the local level. We would like to team up with other local projects across Wales and become strong together. So if there are people listening to this presentation, we'd love to talk about that sort of grassroots approach. And thirdly, we do need national government support. Now, we have had to learn to work without national government support because government is very slow and policies by themselves don't deliver results. You have to have a local engine. But we absolutely need national government to provide incentives for this kind of farming and financial support. One thing which that's very frustrating to us is that government will not recognise a farm that's less than 5 hectares in size. So every farm that we're working with is completely eliminated from government support for agriculture, which is insane when you look at their balance.
Forgive me coming in. You're absolutely right. I'm sure you're right.
Yeah, and I'm sure the politicians will change that.
Can you get that changed? Can you get that changed?
We're going to have a lot of people in Wales are trying to do that, and that could happen really quickly.
Yeah. It's
very frustrating when and that's why we're having to create our own. We're going to have to build our own financial startup facilities because there isn't any. The farms are too small. So we do need support from government, but at the end of the day, food is local, and the agenda will be driven from the local. We will drive the agenda. We will for the whole country, us and all the other people who are like us in all the other regions of Wales, who are making this happen. And we are the ones that are forcing this and pushing this agenda through our politicians.
Peter, given this is all great stuff and very enthusiastic, you're going to pour cold water on it and say, this is all fantasy or not?
No, certainly not. I'm certainly going to applaud Mike and what Monmouthshire is doing, because we have tried to support young families into getting county council tenancies in this part of the world, and have come up against the sort of the interview panel who are fixated with this high input, high output farming model, and so they cannot see. But what we're saying to those people in applying is look at multiple revenue streams. If you've got the hunger, the energy to be an entrepreneur, look at stacking enterprises. I think two other points. One, we only have a 50-acre farm here. 18 months ago, we offered half an acre to a young family to grow vegetables. They were living in a small house in Tiverton with a tiny back garden. They've thrown themselves into it. They're educating both their kids at home now. The wife is predominantly doing the vegetables. And as I speak, we have 6 college students from the urban college in Torbay helping the husband to convert part of our old cowshed into a workshop where he is going to produce woodcraft products to sell on our digital platform. So the point I'm making is it doesn't only have to be county council farms. Yeah. All smaller family farming business models could be re-engineered with help and guidance to be multiple stacked enterprises. And the other thing about land ownership, you mentioned, Duncan, leasing, but there is huge opportunity for the new generation of landowners, and there's an awful lot of them have got a lot of money, very little appetite to properly farm, but they're owning land for different reasons. There is every reason why the political structures can't identify process to help subdivide that land into multiple enterprise stacking. And again, it's all because it's a digital world. But so land ownership should not preclude us radically re-engineering the vision of what the rural economy might look like in 5 years' time. And it definitely doesn't depend on land ownership, but it does depend on helping small, very rich, multiple coloured tapestries of enterprise to build up from existing family farmers and from better use of large landowners being incentivized to encourage these small enterprises.
That's very good, very helpful. Mike, you were nodding away at one point there. Do you see this? I'm trying to capture what Peter there was painting, the picture is painting. It was almost, while you were talking, Peter, I was thinking of medieval strip farming, where, you know, and the villages, some of the villages of the Midlands of England, much more than Wales actually, but actually North Wales has had a bit of this, where you'd get different parcels of land being used as an enterprise from people who lived off the land. They weren't having to live on the land. They could travel. You know, the great Hoskins, the W.G. Hoskins, the Making of the English Landscape, social historian, showed that began to emerge in a very big way in Leicestershire, where suddenly the villages, which in medieval model, the village would be there and people would go out and go out to their piece of land and then come back. And then suddenly with transport, with roads, they would go and live on the land, and houses started emerging in the landscape rather than in the village. And it's almost that there's a flexibility being talked about by you here, that you don't have to live on that land to work that land, and that small parcels of land can become usable. been giving you time to think, Mike. Could the county council go for that model, that not necessarily have it new housing everywhere, but people traveling to that land? Is that your vision?
Well, yeah. Making sure that the travel is obviously not out of proportion to the carbon reductions we're trying to achieve.
That's right.
Because you don't want more cars and more whatever running around the county, and you have a farm of 150 acres and you suddenly got another 50 people working there.
Yeah.
The ideal situation is as it was in the 50s to have housing for farm workers, and a lot of this housing stock is still there, but it's now either being sold off as private houses. But the idea of smaller parcels of land, we talk about the allotments ideas. Now, allotments are being more thought of as community growing spaces.
Yeah.
That, as we know they do in Crickhowell, fantastic, setup there. We own a lot of farms, true. We also own a lot of not currently good quality growing land, and it is semi-brown belt stuff in south of the county. They could be turned over for potential regenerative farms. We also have, apart from the county, a lot of private landowners, tend to be through the CLA, that own themselves in the county many thousands of acres of estate properties. And within there, they have tenanted farms. A lot of those farms are hobby farmers who rely on subcontract labor to do all of the main cereal crop, production work. So they sit there with the stables and doing their lifestyle bit while others are farming their land. But that's pretty common. And how do you...
The problem, sorry to interrupt there, but it's important to make the point here. Those tenants will be producing a global commodity, i.e. wheat at 150 quid a tonne or whatever it's been predominantly. And our vision might say those tenants could be helped to see they could be a functional part of a local food supply economy where they grew heritage wheats, much lower yield, but it was worth 650 quid a tonne to sell it to a baker within the local food economy who produced really good bread that was nutrient dense to sell to people locally. So we need to see, a lot has got to change for that tenant system on those big estates to become really functional and sustainable again.
Yeah, no, this is very rich stuff. And
Tim, could I pitch in about the housing?
Yeah, you can, of course.
You raised it. I do think people do. If you're farming a few acres, particularly if you have animals, you do have to live near it. Right, commuting to farmland is really hard work, and it at the scale we don't want to create 1,200 new commuters all over our region. So we have to deal with this. And you mentioned that idea of houses in the landscape, and that's what I think we have to. That is what we are going to be looking at: is can we put housing possibly, really? Well, we're looking into the options for how you would put housing, possibly temporary housing, but really nice housing, into fields that are 5-acre fields that are being. The other concept we're looking at is the village concept. So take a county farm, take the county farm, the 150 acres. You've got 150 acres and you suddenly want to employ 50 more people on the farm, right? You can't fit them all in the farmhouse because the farmhouse was designed to hold 8 people or something. So you would need to build a cluster of homes, possibly around the main farm building, and a sort of agri-village type thing. So, and there are some wonderful examples of those, particularly we've just been looking at one from Scotland. So I think there are lots of things, but housing we have to provide housing for these farmers. Otherwise they can't farm. It's a no-brainer. They have to live somewhere. And at the moment, there is nowhere, because there is no way they could afford the kind of houses at the prices that they are in villages in our area. It's just not, it's not on the cards at all.
And this is very good. We're getting to the heart of the matter. It seems to me, anyway. I hope the audience thinks so too. I mean, this is very radical stuff, let's be honest. It's very conservative at one level. It's conserving the landscape, it's diversifying the landscape, so it's not conserving, it's changing the landscape. And it's also having to restructure some of the assumptions. And for the British generally, and for the Welsh particularly, and the Scots particularly, the beauty of the landscape as being very few people and lots of sheep. What this project, it seems to me, Mike is smiling because he knows where I'm going on this, it's actually changing that model of what a good countryside is. It's more people in the land. I always say to my students, you know, here we run a master's in, well, the world's only in food policy, and get people from all over the world to the biggest city of Europe, London, and say, well, you go out into the English countryside and you see no one on the land, no one. The vision of this project, it seems to me, is about a vibrant population on the land, working the land, and it's the language of the circular economy, that value stays and circulates, and there's more value to the people from the land. And housing and all of this infrastructure, this is what you set out in your opening contribution, Duncan, to address these big problems. There've got to be some pretty big changes, and housing is going to be, for me, the tricky one for you, Mike, at the County Council. I bet lots of people who like what you're doing, when it comes to housing, they'll think, oh, I'm not sure about this, unless it is really nice eco housing, which is movable, you know, not just the caravan or the mobile home, but something really nice. Conway, the council there has been developing a self-build sort of factory infrastructure, which I think could lend itself to exactly what you're talking about, sort of building enterprise for building something which is very 21st century, low energy housing that is movable, but nice to live in and revitalizes the countryside. I see Peter nodding and Duncan nodding. Mike's having to be probably much more silent on this, but
no, not in the least, Tim. I mean, I was in the conference yesterday and we were discussing, locally produced timber, the reforestation agenda, to use the timber to produce passive houses in a much more meaningful way, that you could use those houses, which are affordable houses, I mean, really affordable, and they could be the basis for new farm housing. And that's where this discussion was going on. And that's been, a lot of the work has been done originally by Coed Cymru up in Newtown, but latterly by Wood Knowledge Wales. So if you want to look at the ideas on passive houses in rural Wales, there's some great articles there.
Yeah, very good. Well, I have a grandson who's an architect who's deeply interested in this. I mean, I think it's back to the theme that both my opening session and the second session, and now this, actually, we've got to be thinking for a good food system, you have to have good building systems. And that's actually really important. And to get architects and town planners and rural planners involved in that seems to me very important. Duncan, you set us going. We've got 10 minutes left. You set us going by painting not an apocalyptic, but a very sobering picture of why this is needed. What are the problems, I asked you, to which the 1200 Our Food project is the solution, and we've been exploring a lot of that. Where are you up to at the moment? Tell our participants, our listeners, who are, if you look at the chat, are extremely interested in this and seeing the big picture.
We're right.
You're taking on the whole thing. You're taking on the whole system.
I know. And well, our Food 1200 is being registered right now with the help of the Welsh Cooperative Centre. The first meeting of the board is on Monday. We have been going for 3 years, building foundations and the relationships. It's all, do you know what it is? At the end of the day, this is all about building relationships. I mean, we spend most of our time, we can talk about techniques of farming and all things like that, but at the end of the day, you're building confidence with people, and it takes time endless time, but that's what it is. That's what social enterprise is. So we've been doing that, and we are literally moving the whole project into local management, local ownership, and then we will forward ahead on that basis. And as I say, pull. We're not trying to create a huge consensus and then move forward. We're moving forward, and the consensus will come out of taking a lead, changing the environment, creating new expectations. So that's basically the strategy. So right now, Monday is the big day.
Very good. Mike, I see you smiling. Are you going to be there as watching fondly?
I think as a, okay, even at my age, I'm a newfound gardener. I'm testing my no dig in my newly found garden. And, we talk about, obviously, Peter, large scale farming, but we can't take away the idea of local produce as it always was. Everybody should be able to do their own composting, their own local growing, their own preserving, and that takes the onus off the larger organization being able to supply urban, because why can't rural produce for themselves, and urban to a great extent? I'm looking forward to where Doug is going with this, and as he knows, he's got lots of support from within the council, not only within the council, but within Peter Fox, the Senate member who brought the food bill to the Senate that was approved in principle the other day. So, we've got local Monmouthshire guys there, a farmer in his own right, really understanding this piece of work, and has understood the Our Food 1200 group concept, and he's backing it all the way from a political perspective.
Yeah, I gather my old friend Jenny Rathbone, member of the Senate, was one of the Labour supporters of that bill. I mean, I think it's very interesting that people get it and see it. Peter, what do you think this is all? You clearly love it and you support it and you're egging it on from the sidelines. Is there any note of caution that you've got? The realism that you want to send vibes down to Duncan Fisher?
I think I was just thinking when you said, Tim, you made the point about there are large open spaces in the countryside with an awful lot of sheep. Yesterday, I was looking at a prototype of a mobile abattoir that has been many years in the creation, partly because the sort of monitoring agencies have had trouble with the idea of dismantling what's become a giant administrative jungle of food production and food processing and all of that. The idea of a mobile abattoir is you go into areas where there are livestock and you value each individual animal. And that stems from farmers going back to properly valuing nature in the way they run their businesses. If we do that, that is the basis of hard economic business modeling, because nature provides us with a lot of free resource which has been neglected. So if we go back to real basics, we appreciate and respect and value the really important things. So in food production, it's nature. If we produce an animal, it should be fully appreciated and valued, and every part of it. So the skins should go into the local economy, or the hide. The food should not be sold and just eaten without realizing the critical link between every mouthful of food and your health. So the bigger picture, I think, is very exciting, but it's based on hard-nosed commercial reality, based around simple building blocks of real value. And there are big corporate interests that don't like that, because they want people to perceive value coming from ultra processing or coming from inputs. No, nature provides sunlight and moisture. Photosynthesis is free. Soil health, soil biology is free. Human health by interacting with nature is free. that should be the most fundamental building block of a really new, exciting, vibrant rural community and economy.
Okay, we've got very few minutes left. There are some really interesting comments and questions in the chat. Just to wrap up some, Holly from Land Workers Alliance has been saying, do you think the venture scheme from Farming Connect providing support for market gardens can be attached to larger farms? Is that sort of thing? I think you've sort of covered that, but I'd be interested, Duncan, in your thoughts on that. People saying, you know, Mike, obviously approval for you thinking about county farms, and that's really, really good. Someone called Adam Alexander, was the person who got this session together, saying, should the Welsh government be asked to shift the 5 hectares benchmark down to 0.5 hectares before sort of support comes in? I think the answer to that is yes, but I'd like your thoughts on that. That 5 hectare stuff is really very important. I'm just carbon offsetting someone. Mike Powell, you've said. Mike's responded. Duncan, what are your thoughts about that? Do you think you can go for, among the many things you're all doing, do you think you could get into the Food Wales bill a shift from the 5 hectares benchmark to 0.5? Is that going too far?
No, well, it has to happen. And what I would like to see is quite a focused campaign. I mean, there are a lot of people in Wales who want this to happen. Yeah, if we could get together, I think we should get together now, and we should really focus on that. It's a quick win. It's not, you know, it's not going to solve everything, but it's one of those things where if that doesn't get through, then my goodness, we've got a big struggle ahead. In response to Holly's point, there are lots of fantastic national programs like Venture that are out there, and we will use all of them as much as we can, because they're there for us. We are the local engine now. We can engage with them, pull them into us, make them, you know, help them work for us. They need places to work in, and we need them. So there's going to be some good partnership working coming up.
Yeah, very good. Mike, do you want to have a sort of a last word? We've got a couple of minutes left.
Yeah, I'm thinking there about further engagement. We talk about training. You bring in, maybe potentially thousands of new jobs, and through the education side, we have the Coleg Gwent, the various campuses, and as a campus is always renowned as being the agricultural college, which has now sort of changed its thinking. But
can I interrupt, Mike? Change the thinking. My speech, I don't know if you heard it, was saying the old colleges of agriculture need to be new colleges of agri-food.
That's where I'm coming from, as well as there are now no courses available, for example, for woodland management, which is crazy in these particular times.
I don't know if you've seen, all of you in the chat, there's a lot about wood, and rightly so, Wales and wood. Go on, Mike.
I mean, the amount of locally sourced hardwoods, it's a fantastic resource, and I know we have the large problems with Phytophthora, but just over the border in Hereford, there's lots of processing, converting what would have been pit props into good quality, materials for fabricating main components of these pasture houses, for example. There's so much could be done from a local economy point of view. And when you look at the circular economy, don't have any waste through the whole supply chain.
Very good. Peter, I'll give you the final word very quickly, 30 seconds.
Picking up what Mike has just said, nature wastes nothing, and it's been around for billions of years. So we should take a leaf out of its book. Yeah,
very good. That's a nice, for me, a nice philosophical note to end on. Look, on behalf of everyone listening, and you've had a very good audience, Peter Gregg from Piper's Farm, Mike Powell from Monmouth County Council, and Duncan Fisher from this Our Food 1200 or 1200 Our Food, this project, you've clearly sparked a lot of interesting comments and thoughts, which are going to run through the rest of this conference. So certainly my thanks to you three on behalf of everyone, and also to Adam Alexander for proposing this session, which I think has just brought us down to the nitty-gritty, actually, of what this conference is about.